Hey there, Marty. How's it going?
I'm doing great. I'm really enjoying our conversation. So again, thank you for this, Mike.
Yeah, it's good. What I'm most impressed about is that we remember to wear the exact same clothes every week
Every
that was
single
sent down.
time.
Yeah.
That's right. Week in, week out, right?
That's right. Okay. Well, these first couple of conversations, we talked about hope and where our hope comes from. And then the last time we talked about how humility plays into that. And this chapter that you're focused on in this section of the series talks about the difficult decisions that come with loving people and how we make those. So can you just sort of start that thought off and where are we headed here in this conversation?
We celebrate, especially in the mainline church. You know, we talk every single Sunday about love, about God is love. God cares for us. God is always with us. The promises of God's compassion and forgiveness and grace, and we hold on to those things so tightly. They're feel-good moments. They're wonderful moments. It's harder for us, and I don't think this is just the mainline church either. I think this is the church universal. It's harder for us to put love in action. It's easier to think of love as an idea. It's hard to take that love and actually give it bones.
Right.
And that's the challenge for all of us as human beings,
Sure.
right? We want to love, but we don't always know how to love.
Yeah.
And frankly, if we're honest, we don't always think people deserve our love. And that's what makes loving really, really hard. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but in this church and in many, many other churches, when we think about loving people who are different than we are, it always incites some interesting conversations, even some conflict.
Of course.
Right? So the first year that I was part of this congregation, we, at the request of the region and the working center here in Kitchener-Waterloo, we opened up our facilities for a overnight shelter, a temporary overnight shelter. I think they were here for about 6 or 7 months. Wonderful people, beautiful sense of community, but different than most of the people who come to church. And so the conversations were, why are they here?
Yeah.
And why would we open our building to those people?
Yeah.
Right? And they're not deserving. They just need to get a job. They're just sponging off of society. It's so easy for us, who are more financially, economically secure when we have our own homes to go to and comfortable pillows and blankets to sleep on, mattresses. It's so easy for us to think of others as completely other, separate. You know, it must be their problem. And again, it's out of fear. Mike, I think it's out of fear because we think that we are protected from that. So it must be something that they did wrong in order for them to have that kind of life. And so why would we spend our time with them? Now, thankfully, wonderfully, the majority within this congregation embrace that community.
Of course.
But those are hard decisions, right? But they are the kinds of decisions that we're called to make as a church. You know, Jesus, when he taught about the great commandments, he said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. And the second, he said, is like this: to love your neighbor as yourself. Lots of commentary about that, you know, and Jesus putting those two commandments together, it's almost like in order to love God, you have to love your neighbor. We like the idea of loving God. We're not always so keen about the idea of loving our neighbor.
Yeah.
And yet, the mark of a thriving Christian community is, according to the authors of this book, and according to my own experiences as well,
Of course.
the mark of a thriving Christian community is a Christian community that really does reach out in love. And I don't think there's anything much more powerful than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you talk about the hard decisions that come with that. As you're talking, I think about the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman. He meets her at the well. First of all, probably would have been better for their party to just go around Samaria in the first place.
Yes.
Second of all, he's at the well in the middle of the day when nobody's supposed to be there. He has gone completely out of his way just to make sure he meets this woman. And I don't know if you've seen the show The Chosen, if that's something you've seen yet. There's this beautiful, dramatic depiction of this. I've watched it 15 times. I cry every time because she's just making all of these excuses as to why she doesn't deserve it. Because she knows she's not only rejected as a Samaritan by the Jews, but by her own people. That's why she's in the well in the middle of the day.
That's right.
She knows, and it's the same as like the homeless population in downtown Kitchener. They know what the rest of society thinks of them. And I'm sure that in their heads, they're going, well, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. And Jesus goes all the way out of his way. And in this show, he looks at her, and like they take a little bit of creative liberties, but he looks at her and goes, why do you think I would come to the well in the middle of the day if it weren't to meet you?
Absolutely. It's all about inclusion.
Oh, and like that's the hard decisions that love makes, right?
Absolutely.
You have to go out of your way.
You have to go out of your way. You have to go out of your comfort zone. You have to intentionally include people, bring people back into a sense of deep connection. Recognize that God created us all as human beings.
Right.
And our point of connection is as human beings. Gets back to the vulnerability thing that we were talking about as well, right? But stories that I've experienced in this building. There was a time that it was about quarter after 6. The people who were living on the streets came into the building at 7 o'clock, but they would start lining up at about quarter after 6 or so. There was a meal for them, and then they stayed overnight. And there was this one fella who was obviously had some mental health issues, and was really struggling, and was starting to get pretty excited. And there was another guy who was about 5 feet behind him who kept on looking up. And I'm talking to the one fellow, trying to say to him, I'm sorry, but I can't let you into the building.
Yeah.
The regulations that were set by the working center, by the region, by ourselves, you'll have to go to the other side and you can come in at 7 o'clock. But he was getting excited. This other fella kept on coming a little closer, and I was trying to figure out what in the world he was trying to do, And so so finally the first guy settled down a little bit. Then the second guy came up to me and he said, appreciate the way that you handled him, because he can get pretty excited. I just want you to know that he's my friend, and I watch out for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that struck me.
Right.
So here is someone who's got a lot of mental issues, who's really struggling in terms of living, but he's got a buddy.
Sure.
He's got a buddy who is watching out for him. Mm-hmm. Now that is love personified.
Yeah.
That actually is Jesus.
Yeah.
I could see in that. And both of them lived on the street. Both of them were part of the community that we think of as, those people. But within that community, Jesus was present in love, care, compassion. It's okay, Pastor, I'm watching out for him, right? Those are intentional decisions that we're called to do. So as a church, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That means, first of all, getting back to some of our other themes, that God is at work out in the community, right? That God is there, that Jesus is present, in that community of people who are living in the rough. And sometimes when we simply engage with them, open our arms a little bit, have a conversation, spend time in a conversation with them, we see God.
Yeah.
We see Jesus. And when we see God and see Jesus, it's easier to love. It's easier to love because we know we're not alone.
Yeah, and so how do we? So I always think there's two sides to this conversation. There's the acknowledgement that love requires difficult choices and going out of your way. And then there's the actual difficult choices themselves. So we'll assume for a second, because we've both been around this church enough to know that this is a church that outwardly, in every way, says, we actively are choosing and trying to walk towards loving our community well. But what are some of those tough decisions that we sometimes need to make to go from just saying that we love people to actively doing it well? When we read this book and it talks about a thriving community that loves others, the first step is acknowledging that that's something that needs to happen. But then the second step is what?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful question, and it's one that the people in this book have looked at as well. Years ago, churches could kind of do that by themselves. Getting back to 50, 60 years ago in this church, lots of people listened to the church, looked to the church for comfort, saw the church as a viable enterprise to be engaged in. The church doesn't have that reputation anymore. So in order for us to love effectively, we need to be in partnership with people.
Right. Yeah.
We can't do it by ourselves.
I don't want to cut you off. I just want to make sure before we get into the second part that we don't miss that part, that there's a degree to which in the past, not just this church, but every church got to rest on the laurels of its positive reputation and its social status within a city. And the reality, one of my favorite authors says one of the biggest jobs as a leader is to define reality.
Yes.
So us defining reality is we don't have that anymore.
Absolutely.
So we can't just assume, right? Like that's, and I just, I know you're going to talk about partnership, but the reason why what you're going to talk about is so important is because the things that we leaned on, that our foundation was built on in the past, those foundational pieces don't actually exist anymore.
They're gone.
Yeah.
They've been obliterated.
Right.
They've been obliterated. Most people, I think the number of people who actually come to church in Canada now is down to 11%, 9%,
it's a really
something
small
like that.
number.
It's really, really small.
Yeah.
So even to go to church, you have to kind of defend, well, why are you going to church?
Yeah.
To your neighbors, to your friends, even to your family. What? Like look all the terrible thing. Why would you do that?
Whereas 60 years ago, it was, why aren't you in church?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's totally different.
So the church cannot do it by itself.
Yeah.
But you see, that doesn't matter to God.
Yeah.
Because God is about love and care and compassion and restoration and building community, building what Jesus refers to as the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And Jesus says the kingdom of God is at hand. It's as close as your hand is to your face. It's here and now. Theologically, we talk about eschatology, end times, and realized eschatology. Realized eschatology is that this abundant life that God promises us in association with Jesus is not just sometime in the vast future. It's not after we die. It's here. Mm-hmm. It's now. Jesus is building that kingdom of peace, of love, of care, of compassion here and now. Mm-hmm. And we can't do that on our own. Yeah. Partnerships are crucial. So the easy part of partnerships is partnering with other churches.
Sure.
So, you create relationships with other churches, and so you have more people, you have greater capacity. Right, that's the easy part. Yeah. The harder part is to seek out partners and to recognize that there still are partners that are seeking out churches that are open to inclusion, love, care, to dealing with the issues of injustice, of alienation, of oppression, of poverty, of loneliness in our world. I've had conversations with community partners, and these are sometimes social agencies, either not-for-profit agencies or government agencies that sometimes partner with the church as well. And always there's this sense of, can we trust you? Yeah. That's the thing. Can we trust you? Are you going to come with an agenda to make us all like you? Yeah. Right? So that we're all people
like
who
this, yeah.
think like you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if that's our status, and if that's our, then they want nothing to do with us.
Right.
But if we're truly interested in doing what Jesus did,
Mm-hmm.
and that is to reach out to those who have been forgotten in society, like the woman in Samaria,
Mm-hmm.
and to show love, compassion, inclusion, not a judgmental attitude, but recognizing that the power of God's love is a whole lot bigger than you.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot bigger than me. It's a
Yeah.
whole lot bigger than any church. It's a whole lot bigger than any of our imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
And that power of God's love is something that so many people within our society
Yeah.
are still searching for,
Yeah.
are still wanting. And so there are organizations that are willing to partner with churches, and that's the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
To truly love, to truly embrace, is to listen to those partners, to listen to the people that they are serving, to literally be vulnerable ourselves, as we were talking about before,
Yeah.
and entering into those partnerships to create a powerful sense of good and well-being in the community, and recognize that God is at work
Yeah.
in those agencies, in those communities, in those church groups, in those synagogue groups, in those in the mosques, in the temples, in the gurdwaras, that God is equally at work in all of those organizations, because God's love cannot be limited, right? So it's listening intently, and partnering. That's the way forward.
And just as we wrap this one up, I'm sure they do it intentionally in the book, and I'm sure you're doing this intentionally as we go through this. But there's something to be said for hope in what God's going to do, then humility, then partnership. Because if we do it the reverse order, it actually doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because if you enter a partnership without humility, you can't get everything out of it.
No.
And if you're looking for the partnership for the hope, then you're going to, and you approach it without, like, you're setting yourself up to fail.
Absolutely.
It's truly, it's foundation in what God is doing in the world first. It's humbling yourself to see what that's going to be second. And then it's getting outside of your comfort zone to see who God wants you to work with third.
So beautifully said, Mike, and reminds me of the conversation. So when we have a conversation, one of the ones that we're having, I won't say it who they are, but they're a government organization that is looking to partner with us, and we look at their values, and they look at our values.
Mm-hmm.
But we always start off by saying we're doing this
Yeah.
because as Christians we see the power of God at work in the world through Jesus.
Yeah.
So just so that you understand, that's what we're all about.
Mm-hmm.
But, so that's the first thing you're talking, it's about God.
Sure.
But we recognize we don't have all the answers.
Right.
Right? That's the humility piece.
That's the humility piece.
Right?
Yeah.
And we know that we need partners.
Yeah.
Right? And again, that's the humility piece as well. And the recognition that to truly love, for the church to truly love, we need others as well, and to recognize that God works through them as well. So yes, beautifully said. I appreciate that.
Well, this has been great. I think this is a lot for people to chew on as they sort of go through the book and go through this series and see stage by stage. Because the big question at the beginning is, well, what's next, or how are we supposed to get this done? And as we sort of walk through this, I don't know if you feel this way, but it feels more manageable.
Yes.
Right? When
Yes.
you talk about it this way, and it feels like there's actually somewhere to go next.
Absolutely. And getting back to it feels more manageable because it doesn't all count on us. You know, when we
100%.
let go of that arrogance,
Yeah.
when we let go, remember we were talking about that arrogance based on fear. When we let go of that fear to say we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
it becomes more manageable.
Yeah.
That's just the beauty of the presence of God in our lives. When we let go is when we have more opportunity.
Yeah.
And that conundrum, beautiful conundrum, is so powerful.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for spending a few more minutes to sort of talk about this stuff. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really excited for next week.
All right, me too, Mike. Take care.
Okay.
Okay.